Every witness on Volume 2 is a family member of Mark and Cheryl Dobbs.
When Gail and I got married, we grew up together, went to school together. And he went in service about 2 years before I got out, so then we married. But I know a lot of people had really bad, I guess, experiences in the military, families divided and separated for long periods of time. But with Gail and I, we got married. I went to Hawaii because that's where he was. We were in the Navy for 20 years, and twice, now he was a Navy man, they go to sea. Twice we were separated for 3 months. He'd get shipped overseas, he'd get a promotion, and they'd ship him back. The Lord had a big hand in our life. You'll find that out. And we loved it. We didn't mind being places. And the thing of it is, a home atmosphere simply means wherever you are. It doesn't matter the country. It doesn't matter where you live. It matters what your life is like inside that house. And military, I loved it. I loved it.
Mark is the oldest. He was born in September. I was born in July. We're almost 2 years apart. And so, yeah, he's the oldest. Then it's myself, and then Marty, the younger brother, and then Susan, youngest sister, baby daughter, I guess, if you want to call her. But Marty, mom and dad kind of had two families. Mark and I were a couple of years apart. And then there was about 7 years difference between Marty and Susan, because they were a couple of years apart. So mom and dad kind of had it fixed up, but they had pretty much two separate families coming up. So, but yeah, there was 4 of us.
With Dad being in the military, we were all born, across different oceans and different sides of the U.S. I was born in Portsmouth, Virginia. That was Dad's last station in the military. We lived there till I was like 5. At that point, we moved back to Walnut Ridge, where both my parents were raised. And that's where I started school, and the boys graduated school.
He was always the cool big brother that I looked up to, He enjoyed doing a lot of the things that I enjoyed doing later in life, He loved the water, he liked to fish, he loved swimming and snorkeling and that sort of thing. And I today I like a lot of the same things. I love being around the water and the ocean and swimming, snorkeling. We grew up with a boat, so he liked to water ski, and he and Danny were really good water skiers, and I grew up loving that sport as well.
Family was my life, okay? And honey, that's all I can really tell you. And they had a wonderful father that provided for us, and I liked my family, and I could go on, and it's just not necessary, because how can you tell you? They had a daddy that just adored them, and he did things with them. We did things as a family, and you've heard all this from the kids. I mean, we spent our weekends together. We go to church. If we didn't, we might go camping, and we spend the weekend. We had a lot of water sports. The kids had hunting, and just a lot of love, okay? Genuine love.
We come from family that knows how to make commitment and stay with it and work through it. And we've had that legacy with our own parents. My dad and mom were married for 52 years before mom passed away. Tony's mom and dad were married until Gail went home to be with the Lord. We were taught to do the work it takes to make a marriage work. And so family relationship was just always the norm for us. And the relationship we had with each other started early, made a commitment, found what we liked, and stuck with it.
They got married and went right in the military, and then come out, and Tony went back to school, went back as an officer. They lived away so much that they was and it's something that I've never experienced, and I've looked at them, but Tony and Cheryl didn't think any more about moving to California than I would moving to the other side of Huntsville. it was that different, and I mean, I'd look at them, scratch my head, because they'd go to Corpus, they'd go to Memphis, they'd go to Virginia, which that's a military life that I'd never been around. Gail was military, Danny, yeah, but I think they was very, very close and very. I mean, like Cheryl talking the other day, like any marriage, I mean, anybody that says you don't ever look at each other cross-eyed and wonder where that come from is lying, but they was so close because they had that independence, and it's me and you. I mean, it's me and you in California, it's me and you in Norfolk, Virginia, it's me and you in Hawaii, you know, so they had grew so dependent upon each other. I mean, they truly, from the outside looking in, they thought alike. They was very dependent on each other, very happy.
You could tell that they were always helping each other, doing things. You know, I don't know, you know, with Mark being retired or even beforehand, I mean, he was probably in the kitchen as much as she was, especially during the holidays. You know, she would have her dish to cook, and he would have, you know, rolls or something like that to fix. But it seemed like they were always concerned for one another. But no, they were close.
I guess it encourages you to think that somebody can stay together for so long and have such a good relationship, you know. And it's kind of been a model marriage from that standpoint. And from every time I've been around them, even if they're at odds for one reason or another, it's so obvious that they were so in love.
Cheryl and Tony loved each other unconditionally, and it was such a deep love, and you don't see that very much anymore. And just the way, when they walked into a room together and they looked at each other, you could feel the love. You knew that it wasn't a put on, it was true love.
My parents were really involved in everything. Like, Mom was kind of the planner, you know. She was like, she organized the meals and the structure in our house and got clothes ready for everybody and figured out what we were having for dinner. And Dad was like the big kid himself. He was the one who was like exploring with us, or like, you know, hopping on a bike and going wherever we were going, or helping us to find a new place in the woods to find a new adventure.
I loved going to Grandpa's Lake is what I called it. I mean, I was constantly outside playing with whatever I could find. I mean, it didn't matter what time of the year it was. I had a bird, so Dad and I always had the bird out, and he'd always teach it how to sing. Like, they don't do a whole lot, but he would whistle and try to teach it little tunes.
Well, we always had meals together. I mean, the phone had to be off, the TV had to be off. If the phone rang, you could, I think when I was older, you could answer it and tell them that you would call them back after dinner was over. But we all sat together. Normally my responsibility was to set the table. It was one of my chores. Set the table, and then when you were done, you had to ask to be excused. It was very structured, but in a really good way. I mean, you sit and you visit, and I do the same thing with our kids now. Is we sit down at like 6 or 6:30 and we eat as a family. My 3-year-old sits with us, and when she's full, she's allowed to get down, but there's no TV or anything until everybody at the table is finished. So we try and model probably a lot of things after the way we did them in our family when I was little.
He wanted to give me my sister's hand-me-down car, which was a Honda stick shift, and we attempted that for I don't know how many hours. And he finally realized that I would not be able to drive that thing. So he ended up giving me his car, which was another Honda, but automatic. And he went and got himself another car. Or he drove my sister's car because I couldn't drive it.
I thought that it was very like, just kind of the American dream. Like, we just got to do all sorts of fun things. You know, we drove on a family vacation every summer, and most of the time it was to see my grandparents who lived in Arkansas. So we'd pack up like in the middle of the night and get in the car and drive for 18 hours to see my grandparents. And spend, you know, a week at the lake and driving all over North Arkansas to see every relative, because normally we live far away since we were in the Navy.
I think it's just, I learned from Cheryl to just step back and let them be themselves. They don't have to do things like, she doesn't have to do things like I do it. She has to do it how she wants to do it. She has to do it, I don't know. I think there's a line between teaching them as they grow up, but then at a point you have to let go and let them become who they are. And that's what I saw in Cheryl. That's how I saw the girls as they got older. It was okay to make mistakes, you know.
And they were just so loving. Like my dad, we'd laugh because we didn't necessarily like want for lots of things in our life. We always felt like we had toys and stuff, you know, but dear Lord, my dad, every time they were here, would come in with some gigantic thing for my daughter. And like it would be a princess tent that would take up half the living room, or it would be, you know, the last time they were here in January when Cord was still a baby, they brought this gigantic kite. I mean, I've never seen a kite so big. It was the length of our couch. I mean, it was just gigantic because he just thought it would be so fun to fly a kite with my daughter. And so he spoiled her. He'd go to Walmart and he'd pick up a pair of river shoes, or he'd just buy things for her all the time. And they knew that we were pretty regimented as far as a routine in our house. But it was funny because my dad was the worst. My mom was very like respectful of our routine, and she wanted to make sure that, you know, she was only doing things the way we would do them. Oh, my dad couldn't care less. He'd get in here and the baby be sleeping and be like, don't wake that baby, you know, because they saw him a lot more when he was an infant, because when Dad passed, Cord was only, oh goodness, I guess 7 months old. And so, you know, sleeping is very important when the baby is still little. And so, but he'd come in and it would be bedtime and he would just scoop Cord up and pick him up and love on him. I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? He is sleeping. You do not wake a sleeping baby. And he'd just say, well, I'm the papa, you know. So it was funny because they just loved them so much. And he wanted, like my dad really wanted to experience everything he experienced with us, again, with my kids. He already had water skis stored in the garage so that he could teach Kieran how to water ski. And he was pushing for like this next summer. I'm like, she's already pretty uncoordinated, so I thought this could be interesting. But he was ready to put her on those water skis as soon as possible. And he just, all the fun things he did when I was a kid and he was young, even in his 50s, he still did all those things with my kid. You know, if there's a leaf pile, you know, they'd jump in it. And, you know, if there are fish to be caught, even if we don't have a fishing pole nearby, he's trying to figure out how to rig something where we can get the fish closer to us so she can have the experience of, you know, watching them. And
I can tell you, you know, when we had kids and Christy was pregnant or about to have kids, Cheryl and Mark would come in and, you know, be here for, you know, well, with Kieran, they didn't come in until she was born, but when Cord was born, they were here 2 weeks before he was born, so they helped out a lot and cooked a lot of meals and all that before he was even born, so we got to take advantage of a little bit of their home cooking and stuff here at the house too. Obviously, once we had kids, I'd say the grandkids were a very, very much a passion of his. And he wanted to spend a lot of time teaching them things as they got older.
I know that the first time I saw him and saw pictures of him with his grandkids, and also just knowing what kind of father he was, that he would be an outstanding grandpa.
we found out about the wreck. It was on Father's Day. This is one of the hardest things to think back on because, you know, when you think back to the news you got that changed your life, it comes down to Father's Day. I had called my dad on Father's Day. I sent him a video first thing in the morning on Father's Day of Cord and I, because we were the only ones up in the house, and Cord was just starting to wave. And so I made Dad a video of Cord waving and saying, "Hi, Papa." And I sent it to him first thing in the morning, but he was in Fort Smith for a Rotary convention. And so I thought, okay, I need to call Dad on Father's Day, but I don't want to call him until later because I knew that they were going to get up in Fort Smith and they were going to have breakfast and then they were going to get on the road. And they were going to make a couple stops to see my grandma, and they were going to go to, they always go to Sam's Club in Fayetteville. It's like their stop. And so I was going to give him plenty of time to get home before I called because I just didn't want him to take a call on the road. So I called him about, I don't know, maybe 4:30, 4:45, and I left him a message and I said, hey, I just want to call and say Happy Father's Day. I was hoping that I might catch you when you made it home from Fort Smith. And I didn't get him. And so that evening, I remember I was sitting here on the couch and Leonard was sitting in the chair. And it was late, and I thought, well, that's weird that he hasn't called me back. That's just not like them. But I thought they must have just gotten busy. It had been a long weekend for them. I'm sure I'll hear from him tomorrow. And it just kept getting later, and it was about 10 o'clock, and I think we were about to go to bed.
We got the phone call at 10, and by 10:30, Christy and I were in the car driving because I'd looked at flights. There was no way to get there to Springfield before 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And the only thing we knew is that Cheryl might not make it at that point. So the only way I knew to get my wife to her mother was to drive. And we stopped and picked up Stephanie, and I drove.
They came and grabbed Stephanie at about 11 o'clock and took her down to the hospital in Missouri in Springfield after the accident had happened. And we had spoken to both of them 30 minutes before the accident because it was Father's Day. So she had called her parents and talked to them 30 minutes before the accident occurred.
We got there at 6 in the morning because it's an 8-hour drive. And from the moment that call came, everything changed. So, my wife obviously lost her father, who meant a ton. She was dealing with the fact that she may lose her mother. Didn't know she may have already lost her mother at that point, and she had to sit in that car for 8 hours and think about all of that. But we got there, and obviously from that time on, Chrissy, she came home one time in 6 weeks. Cord was 7 months old when this happened. He's our baby. My wife, one of the most important things to her is to hold that baby, beat him his bottle. She didn't get to do that for 6 weeks.
And luckily I have an amazing husband because I had to just walk away from my life. Because I knew my husband could care for my children, but the only people that could care for my mom were me and my sister. If Dad had been here, he wouldn't have left her side. So we just had to do what he would have done. So we were there for 6 weeks, and my sister and I grew closer because it was our only choice. And we were just, her advocates, which everybody who's in the hospital needs an advocate because there are so many opportunities for mistakes every day. And when Mom couldn't speak for herself, the only person that could protect her was me or my sister. And we just wanted her to get better. So it was just all about whatever we could do to help, move the ball and get her better.
I think my sister and I made such a good team to where we could catch things that were going wrong. Like if we just felt like something was wrong, we'd know. And we'd know who to tell. Like catching when she went septic, like just symptoms. And we were her advocate basically because she wouldn't have had one. It's really hard to see your mom like that though and not talking. And just not her.
The time in Springfield was just insane. There were so many injuries. so many doctors and so many tests, and you got to start from ground zero. I mean, I remember when she could finally make words again, but when they cap off their trach, so they put what's called a passemeter valve over the trach so that sound can actually come out. And this was like 5 weeks in. She'd already been in the hospital for 5 weeks, and undergone surgeries and tests and all sorts of craziness. And they put this valve on, and you just think, what's going to come out? Like, will she be able to form words? And if she can form words, will they make any sense?
She mouthed the words, "I love you," to me when she was in the ICU, and that, of course, was extremely exciting. I mean, that was amazing. And she'd do that, like, on occasion. If you'd say, "I love you" and "good night," she'd try to word something, like, with her mouth, but she couldn't talk because she had her tracheotomy and she had all the ventilator stuff, so she couldn't talk. But she did that for the first week, every once in a while. And then when she went septic, that all started to stop. She stopped talking. Her responses were totally different. She didn't talk again until, I don't know how far out of the septic shock it was, but I remember her mouthing words again, and it was weeks later that she just completely stopped talking in general. Like, she wouldn't mouth words or do anything for some reason, and we don't know why. I don't know if it was just part of her brain healing, but it was really hard to go through her wording, saying "I love you" when she's in the ICU a couple days after an accident like that, and then her completely shut down.
From a doctor's perspective, but a friend as well, and he just said, that lady in there may never be your mom again. So, because the brain injury that she sustained, the rest of her can heal. The brain injury that she sustained is really bad. So he said, you're going to have to just prepare yourself. He's like, we have no idea the direction this could go. If she'll make it, if she does make it, if she'll be able to talk or feed herself or, or have the same personality. Because once, all the wires get crossed in your brain, and they don't know how it'll all come back together. And then she moved to PATE, which is where she is now. And it's not an acute brain injury rehab program. It's a transitional brain injury rehab program. So it's meant for a longer period of time. And they have all the same kind of therapists that work with them. And she actually lives in the house, at the PATE house. There's 16 rooms, and it's all patients who've had a brain injury. And they design it so that people can grow into more independent type living again. So when she got there, she was expected to get herself dressed in the morning and get herself ready to go out the door, because they leave the house every morning to go to therapy for 6.5 hours, and then they come back to the house. And she finally got to the point, like by the end of August, where she could say, it was the very last couple of days of August, so she could say, my name's Cheryl Dobbs, today's Tuesday, it's September of 2013 or August of 2013, and I'm here because I was in a car accident. She wasn't sure she believed she was in a car accident, but she was well enough to repeat what others had told her. To say, they tell me, that's what she would say, they tell me I'm here because I was in a car accident. And then she'd sometimes add, I'm not sure I believe them, but that's what they tell me.
I mean, there's a world of difference in Cheryl then and now. I mean, Cheryl, she ran that produce company from Bull Shoals, Arkansas. Go down there a time or two in Corpus Christi. You could throw a book that big of accounting figures out there, and in an hour she'd have it gone through, and that's not happening now at all. But there again, where we're at, so much better than where we thought we might be.
The tough thing about having Mom back is that you want 100% of her back. But a big percent of who she was my dad, because they've been together for so long. They grew up together. So he was a part of who she is. So she, no matter what and how much of those injuries she heals from, she will never be the same person she was, because my dad was a part of her.
We'll make a reference to Cheryl. We can't call it Cheryl's house. It's Tony and Cheryl's house. And you know, it's going to be very difficult to ever change that mindset, because it will always be that. It's always been them and their kids together. When we get together, it's the whole family dynamic. And so it was really odd this time to not have that. We're helpless to try to help Cheryl get prepared for life without that. That's going to be hard. And you know, having to process from not being able to have any closure because of the urgency of Cheryl's needs. There's been no closure with the loss of Mark. And so that's still ever hanging there, waiting for that moment where we can really let our focus be on the loss. And as a family, we've not been able to do that yet.
As strong as Cheryl is, you know, as strong of a person as she always has seemed to be, it was always Tony and Cheryl. It was always Mark and Cheryl. It was always them two together from the time she was, you know, from the time I knew her, they were together. And I think their strengths fed off each other. And so, and Cheryl, while she is, like I said, a strong person, this is the first time I've seen this uncertainty in her eyes and in her voice. You know, when she talks about her future now, whereas in the past it was always they knew what their plan was, and their plan was always something together.
You know, Cheryl, she's her life is totally different. You know, you talk to some people, and she's known him since she left high school, and all of a sudden she wakes up one day and he's not there anymore. She didn't get to see him before he was cremated. To her, it's hard for this to be real. But her life, as she was expecting it, stopped on June 16th. Because she was supposed to live the rest of her life with him. And, you know, that's all different. So, you know, Cheryl's got to make new plans and new dreams and new memories without him. And, you know, it shouldn't happen that way. It shouldn't happen that way.
Surely, you know, they're a family that's very protective of Mom. She's in a self-preservation mode right now since the wreck. She didn't want to create a scene, but she couldn't handle her emotions. She's the one that has been more weepy. And the stress of it all affects her health. I would say that her health is the most fragile. So they're all in, Mom doesn't need to have to do this mode.
I'll tell you, you know, it's kind of hard for me to sit here and talk about Tony. Tony, well, golly, Tony was special. You see, I'm staying away from Tony. I can't. And I took something from my nerves.
We don't know how bad it's going to wipe her out when it's all said and done. She internalizes big time. I think that's where they learned it. And she stayed home. She would come to the hospital. She would make an appearance to see the girls because she wanted to see the girls. But then when she'd start falling apart, she'd leave. And she just couldn't stay there because she was so wrapped up in her grief that she couldn't process anything more than her grief. Just like, for the most part, the rest of us have had to be so wrapped up in Cheryl's recovery. Shirley's been the one that's been able to be home and grieve. Because she's the mom.
We just wrapped arms around each other. Just cried and cried. Because seeing her made me think of Tony, and her seeing me made her think of Tony.
You know, no doubt that she's raised 4 amazing children. And no mama's ever ready to lose one, ever.
Probably the greatest compliment I ever got from my brother was when he asked me and my husband, Rick, to be the godparents for his girls. I never imagined having to call him and say, your dad's gone.
Being a grandfather, the amount of loss or what his grandkids aren't going to be able to experience. I guess that hurt me the worst, is realizing, and especially when Cheryl was hurt so bad, not knowing what was going to happen to her, just the thought of them, those, not the girls are old, you know, they can work their way through it, but the grandkids, you know, not to be able to experience the relationship that they were going to have. And because Mark was pretty excited, you know, once he got it was later on in life, but once he got his first granddaughter. And so just the thought of them not being able to experience him and having a relationship with him. So I got to be able to, they were over here Thursday, and to be able to play with them myself, you know, it's just, it hits me every time. It's just real sad.
Definitely a void there, but you know, how does Tony fit into it? There's not a Tony without a Cheryl, and vice versa.
When she got to Baylor, the very first day, they had a conference, a care conference, to see kind of where she was, you know, starting point. So it was around lunchtime, so I took off from work and went over there to that care conference, and I was a little late getting there. And I walked in, and Cheryl, the first thing she did was she looked at me, and there was probably 6 doctors there, and she sat up and she looked, and she said, "Is Mark with you?" And from that point, we knew we couldn't tell her because she wasn't ready to receive that information. She still had a lot of healing she needed to do before she could hear that. And so between all of the family, Stephanie, Christy, I, Ryan, everybody, I mean, you know, we had to tell Cheryl, like, well, nope, he's not here today, or, you know, he's not with me, it's just me today, and it was very hard because we couldn't have the conversation with her because her mind and her body were not ready to deal with that yet. But we were all dealing with it, you know, and then she would continually ask about him, so it made it very, very hard. But we made it through, and now she's to a point where she can start to process that, and it's going to be a long, long road for her. I mean, she was married to the guy for almost 40 years. It's the only person she'd known, so it's going to take a while.
She sleeps, and in her dreams, he's there with her. And so then when she wakes up, it feels so right that he's with her. And so then it's very hard for her to have to awake and realize it's not real. What felt like it wasn't real is having to become what's real. And what feels normal in her dreams is what's not real. And so she's had a hard time processing that. And we've had a hard time helping her process that.
Even when you reminded her, she still would say, "No, I just talked to him." Or, "No, I just saw him." That was a hard thing to go through, having to constantly remind your mom, Dad's gone. Like, that's a constant daily struggle to have to tell your mom he's gone. And it's like reminding her over and over and over.
Just imagine going and telling your mother every day your dad died. You know, I mean, because I know what it was like for Susan and Shirley, and you know, and every day it's a new deal, but it had to, at some point they had to, and she she knows, but I think the long term, if she gets better, it's still tough because you forget.
So it's frustrating because you think, oh, we're just getting so much better, and you know it's inevitable, but you don't want to like hurt her progress. But while she was at Baylor, we had to tell her about my dad. And of course my mom, because she's she cares so much about other people, the first thing she said was, that must have been so hard on you and Stephanie and Grandma Dobbs. And so she kind of comprehended it a little bit, but not all the way. You could just tell that she wasn't quite getting it. And she got kind of teary and snipply, but she wasn't putting it all together. And we realized as the days went on that every time you talked to her, it was fresh. She wasn't remembering just a couple hours previous. And when we would tell her again about my dad, she couldn't connect all the dots. So she would say, well, I realize that your dad is deceased, but what do you think he's doing at the house? Where is he? Is he fishing? We'd say, well, Mom, we told you, Dad's gone. We lost him in the accident. And she'd say, I understand that, Christy, but what is he doing?
And like the first day that we got to tell her about Dad, and we took her down to the chapel in Baylor and sat her down and talked to her, it was almost like it didn't completely register. Like Christy and I got more upset about it than she did at the time, but you can't ever tell what's going on in somebody's brain when they've had that kind of injury. So I wonder if she thought that we were making it up or what, but she didn't take it as hard as we thought she would until like more recently. Now she'll cry a lot more. She'll get more upset. Anything you mention like that could have had to do with Dad, it's almost like you can hear her get teary-eyed.
We have Mark's cell phone sitting over here on the counter, and Cheryl tried texting him several times after we told her, tried emailing him, and we're sitting here in the house at 10 o'clock at night, and a text message would come through to his phone, and she was very frustrated because she couldn't get a hold of Mark, and we told her several times that obviously that Mark was gone and those kinds of things, but she just couldn't commit that to memory. And so it's just been over the last 4 or 5 weeks that she's been able to finally commit that to memory, and so you have the struggle of having to tell her over and over again, that somebody has passed, and when it's your own father, that makes it even harder, and for Christy to have to go through that was very, very difficult.
And we as a family are committed to helping them get through this. It's bittersweet. Kieran has taken immediately to Danny because he looks the most like Tony. She laughs and says, but he doesn't have this, because Tony had the mustache and Danny doesn't. But even though he's thrilled that she's drawn to him, every once in a while, at first especially, she would be calling, my kids call him Fruha. We don't know why, but that's his name, and she would call him Fruha, and then she would slip and she'd say, wait, Papa. And there's this deep guttural groan that makes him know she's missing her Papa. You can't take that back.
Like they really did complete each other. And I can see how now that he's not here, I can tell more than, you don't realize how much people complete each other when they're together all the time. But now that he's not here, I can see, just little things that she does that I would have never seen before. I don't know, I wonder if he was here, would she still do that? Would she feel the need to ramble on about something like that if Dad was here and he could give me his input too? Like stupid little things, but I mean, she's just not completely herself. She's more sad, of course. And that was who she talked to about everything. So she doesn't have that now. And I think that makes it really hard for her. And then like right now when she's crying, if we start talking to her, it's really hard because she'll tell you that she doesn't want to cry because she doesn't want to upset us, but she doesn't really have anybody else to tell. So it's hard that he's not here for her.
Mark was a very important person to all of us. You know what I mean? I mean, from somebody like myself who only knew him for a short amount of time to, you know, every one of them. You know, I mean, his grandkids at a young age, not knowing why in the world all of a sudden their grandfather isn't here anymore. You know what I mean? Like Leonard and Christy, you know, having to work on top of having to take care of their kids, on top of having to take care of their mother, on top of, I mean, good God, who deserves to go through all of that?
We intend to call each family member contained in this documentary at trial. We're willing to schedule their depositions as soon as possible.